where I just want you to kind of sit back and let me kind of riff for a second here, because I've got to go on a little bit of a rant about the state of the 147-pound division, because this has been bothering me all weekend long as I've been following the social media back and forth between several of the champions at 147. It's been kind of a maddening situation. So, what's happening right now at welterweight is kind of encapsulates everything that's wrong with boxing, right? You've got four title holders, as I mentioned: Boots Ennis, Brian Norman, Amanta Stanionis, and Mario Barrios. None of them right now have fights scheduled. This weekend, as I mentioned, three of them spent time on social media and in some interviews talking about how they want the fights, but they weren't being offered the right amount of money for the fights. And I'm telling you, Keith, my blood was not literally, but it was boiling because I feel like I know how this story ends. But for people that don't know the situation at 147, let me just lay it out for them. You got Stanionis, who is going to be the WBA full title holder at 147 once the Crawford stuff is cleared up. He has fought once in the last 2.5 years. Not his fault. Last year was a lost one because of the Virgil Ortiz health issues. But he has fought once, and that was back in May. Nothing scheduled this year. No indication that anything is cooking. Mario Barrios has the WBC belt, and he has been a little more active, but right now he's sitting around basically waiting for a Manny Pacquiao fight that's never going to happen. My understanding is that Pacquiao's dreadful performance in that last exhibition last month officially ended any real plans for him to make a comeback for a world title fight. Someone close to Pacquiao told me that Pacquiao's focus right now is on these upcoming Senate elections. Could do another exhibition, but right now the Senate is more of a priority for Manny Pacquiao. Brian Norman has been at the center of this. He has been presented an offer to fight Boots Ennis. His team says they countered. Meanwhile, Norman, his dad, Eddie Hearn, who promotes Boots, they say they rejected it. If Norman does not fight Boots, he is being penciled in for a title defense on the undercard of Keyshawn Davis fighting in Virginia. Now, let me repeat, the undercard of a Keyshawn Davis fight. That is, to me, a complete waste of time. Though not as big a waste of time as what Boots Ennis is looking at. Because if Boots Ennis cannot get a unification fight, he is facing a mandatory defense against Karen Shukajan. Now, if that name sounds familiar, it probably should. It was just last year that Shukajan was shut out by Boots in a fight that he made zero effort to win. Zero effort. He's won 3-0 fights in a row, and the IBF, in all its wisdom, has made him the mandatory for that exact same belt. This is really, Keith, like a movie studio putting out a box office bomb and then quickly ordering a sequel. It's like the boxing equivalent of seeing Geely and saying, you know what, fuck it, let's give Ben and J-Lo another go at it. It makes no sense whatsoever that this fight is back on the table. So Boots needs a unification fight to avoid shoving that crap down our throats. So this to me is just mind-blowing how this is all playing out, because I firmly believe, Keith, that 2 months from now, we're either going to be talking about these title holders being inactive with no fights or taking crappy title defenses. What say you?
Well, Chris, Karan Shakadzian, it was viewed as a victory for him to go the distance with Boots Ennis. It ended a long knockout streak by
Not how you
Boots
say
Ennis.
his name. I was only going by Mauro Ranallo's pronunciation of that fight.
From when I covered his fight last year, because I covered the Ennis Chikadzian fight from
Yeah,
ringside, it was on the Gervonta Davis undercard down in
that's the
DC.
phonetic way to say it, I think. I don't know.
Yeah, and so anyway, it's not as much fun as we all had with it that Boots was fighting a Karen. His name is pronounced Karan in Ukraine. So Karan Shakadzian, I believe, is how it's pronounced. However it's pronounced, we shouldn't need to know how to pronounce it, because he should, under no circumstances, be the number one contender in the IBF again. These sanctioning organizations oftentimes do egregious things that make our jobs very easy, Chris, because they're like lobbing softballs to Aaron Judge, basically. So
Big fat ones.
really, I mean, so This is more perplexing maybe than anything that the IBF has done in recent years, and that's saying a lot. I mean, the IBF, of course, is the New Jersey-based organization that tends to stick to its rules more than the others who tend to make up their rules as they go along and as it
Part
suits
because they
them.
were raided by the FBI many years ago. So yeah, that's
Right, and they once upon a time had an FBI monitor in their office after taking bribes to rank fighters and everything. And I know the FBI has far more important things on its plate at this point, particularly with the divisiveness in our country and a presidential candidate being someone trying to assassinate him, and they have more important things to do than monitor boxing rankings. At the same time, maybe it's time to get the FBI back involved with the IBF because there's nothing that anyone could tell us from the IBF, Daryl Peoples, who I like. I mean, but there is nothing that anyone could tell us that would make any sort of sense for ordering a rematch between Jaron Ennis and Karan Chikadze. Chikadze's a good, look, he's fine. I mean, he's a legitimate top 15 guy. He went the distance with Boots, but he lost virtually every second of every round of a 12-round fight. He got shut out on all three scorecards. There is absolutely positively no need to see them in the ring together ever again. So for him to go and win three relatively nondescript fights against non-ranked, maybe they're ranked by the IBF, but that's not saying a lot. They're not top 10 welterweights that he's beaten. And even if they were, what would be the real justification for getting him in the ring with Jaron Ennis again? It makes virtually no sense. And if Matchroom in this case, because they're Jaron Ennis's new promoter, if Eddie Hearn and his company have to pay for that rematch, how are you going to go about selling that to the people of Philadelphia who just turned out for Boots' fight? They sold, I think the announced attendance was 14,000 or something. It was the biggest crowd for a boxing match in Philadelphia in decades. And it proved that Jaron Ennis, one of the elite talents in the sport, while still having something to prove, is a real gate attraction. He proved that. They were more than willing to come back by the end of the year with some semblance of a real fight. And then you get stuck with this. Brian Norman would have been a real fight. Jaron Ennis would obviously be heavily favored to beat Brian Norman. Brian Norman's a pretty big puncher. He's a fun fighter, abandons defense. He's made for good TV so far, and good for him for getting in the position and winning a fight. Maybe some people thought that he was going to lose, but he's a young guy. He makes for good TV. And yes, we all would have liked to have seen him take this fight against Jaron Ennis. They might have some other plans at Top Rank for him. The bottom line, though, as it relates to Jaron Ennis, is how would you go about selling that fight to the people of Philadelphia or the people of anywhere? Because there's just no point to the fight happening. And really, someone has to answer for this. And they tend not to answer the phone or emails or whatever when they don't want to discuss what they know they could not really explain in any reasonable way. So someone has to, frankly, if I were Jaron Ennis, I'm going to make my money at 154 pounds anyway. If someone tries to make me go through with this Karan Chikadze fight or get stripped, maybe I just say, you know what? Yeah, I would like to unify the titles, and I could beat Mario Barrios and Emantas Stanionis, who's probably the best, the better between those two fighters, him and Barrios. Would be favored to beat him, would be favored to beat Brian Norman, but maybe just move up to 154 pounds and make your money. Because how would he get now? Boots is a professional, he's a perfectionist, a professional, and still in the heart of his career, prime of his career. I'm sure he would train hard, but how would he really be able to get himself out of bed at 3 o'clock in the morning or whenever he gets up to do his road work and motivate himself to fight Karan Chikadze again? It doesn't make any sense from a business standpoint, from a boxing standpoint, and it's really the epitome of what is wrong with this business.
To go back to the sellable aspect of it, like putting aside like fans, right? Like maybe there are some fans that'll come and watch Boots regardless of who he's fighting. Look, he sold every one of those tickets to that fight against Avanesian. No one was there to see him against David Avanesian. But if you're a network that is going to be on the hook for $3 million, $3.5 million, whatever that fight ultimately would cost, maybe a little bit less. I don't know. Whatever the amount is, like, why are you paying that? How this ends. Like, you know what it's going to look like. Like in the last year and a few months, Chikadze has not become a different fighter. He's not going to go in and stand toe to toe with Boots Ennis after going 12 rounds with him. He's going to probably do the exact same thing. So I don't know how you sell that if you're Eddie Hearn to a network, your network, that this is a fight worth investing in. I don't know how you do it.
Yeah,
That's the yeah. Go ahead.
no, but and there are plenty of times when we can point the finger at Eddie Hearn for maybe making some fights that people don't want to see or whatever. That goes for every promoter. I mean, they get stuck with fights, they make fights that people don't want to see. In this case, he's essentially blameless. What is he supposed to do? I mean, because the thing that I would like to see Jaron Ennis do, and I know it's a tough ask because, I'm not the one getting up, and doing all this road work and all this sparring and building yourself into becoming a world champion. If Jaron Ennis really wants to make a statement, much more so than if he went in there and knocked Karan Chikadze out, which he was unable to do in their first fight. The statement that he could make is tell the IBF, thank you for allowing me to fight for your title a couple of times. I don't want it anymore. If you're mandating that I fight him again, I just don't see any point in doing that. It's a waste of everyone's time and money. I'm going to move forward with my career in a different direction. And I think everyone in boxing would respect Jaron Ennis more. And this isn't his fault either. He didn't ask for this. I mean, Jaron Ennis wants to fight Terrence Crawford. He wants to fight Virgil Ortiz. He wants the biggest and best fights. He's been unable thus far to secure those fights. But it's hard to blame him here either. But the blame lies solely with the IBF. But if I'm Jaron Ennis, I just say, I'm not fighting him again. So let's figure out something else. And if that means moving up to 154, which is inevitable for him anyway, and that's where the real money for him is going to be, maybe that's just what you do. Or, you know what? You say, I'm the uncrowned welterweight champion. And maybe they can go make a fight with Amantes Stanionis or Mario Barrios. I don't know that that would necessarily be easy either, because those two guys are affiliated with PBC, and the more natural thing to do, assuming Manny Pacquiao is removed from this equation, which hopefully he would be to have Mario Barrios and Amantes Stanionis fight each other. And then you have some sort of unified champion, and then you go from there. That would be the easier thing for PBC to do, but that's not a huge fight either. It's a meaningful fight in the sense that you could unify two of the welterweight titles, but it's not a big fight from a marketing standpoint.
No, it's a co-main on a pay-per-view, maybe it headlines an Amazon Prime non-pay-per-view card, but it's not a pay-per-view headliner. The way out for Matchroom and for Boots Ennis seems to be Brian Norman, which I never really thought was realistic until the last few days when, Norman was out there, his father was out there. I'm sure you have had conversations with our best friend, Jolene Mazzone, who insists that they want the fight. Jolene, of course, the manager for Brian Norman, who says they want it, who says they made a counteroffer to the offer that Matchroom made, according to them, as we record this late Monday afternoon. No counteroffer has been given back to them. And then the stuff started to leak out about Brian Norman fighting on the undercard of the Keyshawn Davis fight. Like, if you're Brian Norman, what does that do for you? Like, what, as bad as a Chukadzian fight is with Boots Ennis, I don't know that a Brian Norman title defense on an undercard is much better for him. I don't know what that does for him, except maybe gets him a quick paycheck that can maybe lead to something better. So, I mean, as we sit here talking about this, do you think that unification fight is dead? Do you have a percentage chance you'd put on that? Like, how do you view Norman Boots?
Well, my guess is that he's going to fight on Keyshawn Davis's undercard, because I don't think they're not going to tell us this, but I don't think that they view Jaron Ennis as a welterweight champion that he could beat at the moment. So if you're them,
them being top rank, you're saying,
basically. Meaning top rank and his management team, I think realistically they would have to look at it like, we have them off. Look, he's made for great TV, and ESPN and Top Rank are trying to put on fights that people will want to watch. Now, he's not a household name or anything like that, but if you go back and watch what he's done in his televised fights, he's someone he's entertaining. So maybe get him into that fight on the Keyshawn Davis undercard. He wins that fight, then maybe you get him another title defense and build toward a unification fight that might be more realistic for him to win. Because I think in a quiet moment, they would tell you that, I'm not saying Brian Norman is afraid to fight Jaron Ennis. So these guys typically are not afraid to fight anyone. It has to make the most business sense. So if you could make good money for a couple of title defenses that you would view as winnable, whereas the fight against Boots would make you more money than either one of those title defenses, but it's a fight that he's not going to say this to himself, and his dad's not going to say this. They think they can beat anyone, as well they should. It's not a fight that he's going to win. So you lose all your leverage almost immediately after winning the title, after being elevated from interim champion to full champion. So I would understand it in that sense. So I don't think that the fight is going to happen next. It would be just based on what we were discussing earlier. No one wants to see the rematch between Ennis and Chikadzian. So hopefully we find some way to go in a different direction than that. But I don't see it being Ennis against Norman. I just don't think it's from Brian Norman's perspective. I don't think it makes the most sense right now because, and I'm not saying it's a fight he could win in 2 years either. And Jaron Ennis will be out of this division in 2 years anyway. But I don't think it's a fight that they think that they can win, honestly. And I think that's why they'll go in a different direction.
If he was going to fight Teofimo Lopez, I'd be all for it. I mean, that's a marketable fight for Brian Norman. Maybe a winnable fight with Teofimo moving up to 147. But like, it sure sounds like to me that right now Top Rank is kind of scouring those WBO rankings, looking for somebody to fight Brian. And that, I mean, I guess, what are you going to make for that? A couple $100,000, maybe not bad money, but not great
Chris,
either.
they don't have to scour the WBO rankings. They just
get somebody
get
ranked.
someone
it's
might
right. But I mean, I guess
mysteriously appear by next week. Let's just say.
I don't know the numbers. That I would guess that it's $1 million package at least that Brian Norman's being offered to fight Boots Ennis. I think that's reasonable. And look, when I talk to, I usually say like Norman's people, we both talk to Jolene. So I talk to Jolene, like she seemed to suggest that there was room to make this fight happen. If it falls apart over, look, if Brian Norman and his team really don't want it, that's one thing. But if it falls apart over like $100,000, $200,000, something like that, then everybody's stupid and everybody's just being goofy. Because if he really wants to fight, look, it's a fun fight. Two guys that can crack, two guys that are television friendly. I would favor Boots in that fight, but it's a great fight. And at least we'd have something. But right now, the only scenario I can see is what I started with, where Boots is either fighting Chikadzian or in a non-title fight because he dropped the belt. Norman fighting on Keyshawn's undercard in Virginia. That just, oh, God. That's what you're going to do. And, Stanios and Barrios probably idle the rest of the year. Like that to me is kind of where this is trending. And that's maddening. That is why I bring it back. This is what's wrong with boxing, that you're squabbling on social media and not making big fights happen.
And in some ways, Chris, we're starting over. We're starting from scratch in the welterweight division, right? Because most of the last 5 years have been about, or up until last July 29th, the 5 years prior to that were all about making Terrence Crawford, Errol Spence Jr. That's what everyone wanted to see. That was the dominant narrative.
Just what people want to hear. You got we'll go 5 full years to pick one of these next big fights.
What I mean by that is it completely consumed the minds of welterweight fans, right? I mean, yeah, we did see Errol Spence fight Sean Porter. Then we saw Sean Porter fight Terrence Crawford. For the most part, everyone wanted to see Crawford and Spence finally go at it. It took up, from the time Errol Spence won the title in 2017, then Terrence Crawford moves up in 2018, beats up Jeff Horn, becomes a champion. It's what we were building toward. And it was a slow build, and it looked like at times like it would never happen. We finally get to that point. And yeah, it was a dud because a lot of things had happened to Errol Spence at that point in time. Terrence Crawford, probably the best pound for pound fighter in the world. He beats him up. The fight was a dud in the sense that it didn't live up to anything that we were expecting it to be. Maybe that part of that was some of what happened to Errol Spence in the car accident, his retina surgery and all that kind of stuff. The point is, there was something to look forward to in the welterweight division for those 5 years. And there's a lot of back and forth, and I'm sure people got tired of it at a certain point, but we did finally get to see it. And now you're kind of, Terrence Crawford moves up. Errol Spence is supposed to move up, and who knows what's left of Errol Spence at this point. And Jaron Ennis wanted to fight both of those guys, and now he's just kind of here with these other nondescript welterweight title holders. And it's, well, should I move up? Should I go try to fight Virgil Ortiz if Ortiz isn't going to fight Crawford? So that's kind of the weird position that Jaron Ennis finds himself in, because he's 27. He's right in the heart of his physical prime, and he doesn't want to waste much of that with the types of fights that people don't want to see. So, but this happens a lot of times, even in the glamour divisions of boxing, Chris, as we well know. I mean, in 1999, we got Oscar De La Hoya and Felix Trinidad, and then there was a long time in between when we didn't get a super fight in the welterweight division. Then we eventually got Mayweather-Pacquiao, the fight that everyone wanted to see and made more money than any fight in boxing history. So this is going to just be one of those dormant periods in the division, and hopefully we get some fun fights out of it, some fun competitive fights among guys who are basically at the same level. But I don't think that next fight, unfortunately, is going to be Ennis and Norman. I would like to see it too, because I think it would be entertaining. Be it on television on ESPN or being streamed by DAZN. I think it would be a fun fight, but I think Jaron Ennis would be heavily favored and rightfully so going into that fight. But Brian Norman can punch, like you said, and they're two young, Black American fighters, and that's good for the sport too. I mean, to have two welterweight title holders from the United States, fighting in a major city in the United States in Philadelphia, that would be great for the business as well.
The takeaway is every 9 years we get a great welterweight fight. So in 2033, get ready.
Wow.
Mark your calendar, get your popcorn. A big fight's coming to 147.